just putting in some tag grant applications.
Yeah, this next month we were just getting all our ones completed for this last year. It was such a short.
Yeah, I know.
So this is the science communications portion for the Future Florida Springs. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this quote by Aldo Leopold. If any of you have never heard of him, you definitely need to look this guy up. He's an amazing nature writer. He wrote a Sand County Almanac and sketches here and there in 1948, a long time ago. But his words are amazing. The outstanding scientific discovery of the 20th century is not television or radio, but rather the complexity of the land organism. Only those who know the most about it can appreciate how little we know about it. The last word in ignorance is the man who says of an animal or a plant, "What good is it?" If the land mechanism as a whole is good, then every part is good, whether we understand it or not. If the biota, in the course of eons, has built something we like but do not understand, then who but a fool would discard seemingly useless parts? To keep every cog and wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering. Okay, did that make sense, kind of? He pulls you around. So who am I? My name is Sandra Poucher. I'm a published author and editor. I edited and compiled Sheck Exley's unfinished manuscript for the Taming of the Slough. Sheck Exley was a world-famous cave diver, cave explorer. He was also a math teacher. Dr. Rick Copeland and I compiled a Speleological and Karst Glossary of Florida and the Caribbean. I wrote and illustrated a field guide to the critters of Florida Springs. And most recently, I wrote and illustrated the wildlife of Florida Springs. And I've written articles in newspapers and magazines. I'm an illustrator for books and logos for businesses and nonprofits. I am a former cave explorer and scientific diver. I explored and surveyed underwater caves in Florida, Mexico, and the Caribbean. Underwater cave exploration involves surveying, recording the depths, distances from the entrance and other openings, and recording features of cave passages. As a scientific diver, I work to monitor springs for state agencies, nonprofits, and businesses, taking measurements of water temperature, composition, visibility, and other conditions. My favorite activity, though, was the critter counts, and that's where we count the number and the variety of species in the passages. That was always fun. I am also a wife. I have my husband, Michael Poucher, is still a cave explorer. He just got a new rebreather. I have 2 adult stepdaughters. They live in Georgia. And I have a son who was born in 2011. He is probably playing video games. I am a Florida native of Crystal River on the Gulf Coast, about an hour north of Tampa. And I currently live in Ocala, about an hour south of Gainesville. So why do we write? Why do I write? Why do any of us write? To extend human knowledge beyond what is already known. For example, understanding how pollutants move through dynamic Karst systems. That sounds like a mouthful, doesn't it? But when you understand it, you can explain it. So it's important to learn these things so you can explain it to the people who don't understand. We're going to spread knowledge among people who might otherwise be unaware of certain situations, trends, or events. For instance, legislative actions that can affect homeowners or landowners, or the discovery of a new species. We're going to change attitudes and behaviors, encouraging behaviors and activities benefiting a community or a local ecosystem. So who remembers give a hoot, don't pollute? Yeah. We want to share the human experience, to disseminate our experiences, our findings, and our personal connections with nature among our friends, neighbors, our community, and the larger world. So like fish stories or family histories or generational stories. It's important that we share these things so people know where we are and where we're going and where we've been. My fear is that people, especially children, are not forging the same strong bond with the outdoors. There is nature in subdivisions, but it tends to be sterilized, sanitized, mowed, clipped, and edged, rigid. We have a challenge, the wonder of the natural world, and how we relay that wonder to people who might otherwise never experience or consider springs, wildlife, or ecosystems, and how we fit into all of this. Environment has become a somewhat toxic word, but why? There's a perception that individuals and organizations associated with the word environmental are in some way restricting people from doing the things they like or want to do. This is a misconception. Am I being too loud? It is largely our job as communicators to explain and reassure people that environmentalists aren't trying to stop anything. We are trying to keep things going, keep things open, safe, and available, and accessible for everyone to enjoy. Does anybody else have anything to add to that, like what environmental means to them, or what they have heard other people?
It is a word that's been politicized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit. So what other words could we use? So nature writing,
Yeah.
sounds kind of benign. Environmental writing, automatically you're an activist.
Right.
But nature writing, which they're actually two different things, but we have to start looking at the language that we're using. Okay, a brief history of nature writing. The earliest, and I have this in here too, the earliest published nature writing in America. They were basically field reports, such as those of Captain Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, John Muir, Spencer Baird. To reach a large general audience, writers describe nature in a romanticized or oftenly over-sentimental way. They glamorized everything. They were selling the country. They were selling the resources in the country. Writers also depicted nature in anthropomorphic terms, referring to the continent as she, giving landscape features and animals human traits, as in the books White Fang and Moby Dick. The good is that these depictions helped readers relate to unfamiliar animals, landscapes, and situations. The bad is that readers didn't necessarily comprehend the animals, landscapes, and situations as distinct or having relevant individual attributes. Now, Jack London thoroughly knew what he was doing when he personified the wolf. He used anthropomorphism as a literary device. Now, by published, I put a star because the earliest produced nature references would definitely be the petroglyphs and pictographs, things that were in writing from the people who were here before Europeans came here. And we had those in South Florida, we have those in the Southwest, we have them in the Northeast, we have them in Georgia. They're everywhere. They're all over the country. And then I put the word therianthropy in here because I had never actually heard this word until I recently read a book depicting humans and animals as part humanoid or part animal. So you guys may be more familiar with therianthropy, furries, werewolves. But in the beginning, we were part of our world. We were part animal, animals were part of us, we were all a big family. And that's something that the Europeans had more of a us versus them, because they had gone more into an agrarian society in which they had to protect their crops and their livestock against the predation. On this continent, people worked with everything. They knew the predators were part of the whole. This wasn't my deer herd, it was a deer herd. The earliest American writings cataloged individual plants and animals in minute detail and in glorious illustrations. These are amazing. But without regard to natural history or ecology. They didn't look at the flower's place in the ecosystem, they looked at the flower. Audubon tried when he did the birds with the plants, but even there he wasn't always putting them correctly. The concept of ecology was simmering in the back of naturalist minds. The purpose of the writing was largely to list and describe the vast resources available. Scientists versus naturalists, so writers began asking if humans were apart from nature or a part of nature. Writers and scientists began thinking more deeply about our relationship with the land, and this led to a greater urge to share information without embellishing, to show and teach about all the cool things being discovered in more honest and more straightforward terms. So we're coming full circle, sort of, aren't we? Over time, and a few extinctions, like passenger pigeons, stellar sea cow, beaver and bison, almost, naturalists realized we needed a more comprehensive understanding of landscapes and the endemic plants and animals, the history of these places, and the effect of mankind on the ecosystem, as well as the effects of these landscapes on the minds and habits of man. So Florida's lucky. We have some amazing writers. We have people that have visited and been just mesmerized by what we have. So, like Dr. Null referred to, William Bartram's Travels in 1779 is one of the earlier ones. We have, I think Cabeza de Vaca spoke a little bit about Florida, but he's mostly the Southwest. Then we have John Muir, 1,000-Mile Walk to the Gulf. That was published in 1916. It was compiled from notes after his death. His walk was actually in 1867. Then Marjorie Kinnan Rawling, she moved to Florida from New York, and she fell in love with the people in the land. So some of the books that we love of hers are The Yearling, written in 1938, Win the Whippoorwill in 1940, and Cross Creek in 1942. Then Zora Neale Hurston, who I absolutely love, she's in the photo. She is a native of Eatonville, Florida. She, oh gosh, just everything she wrote is amazing. If you can get your hands on anything that she wrote, read it. It's just all of it. Mules and Men, 1935. Seraph on the Swanee, published in 1948. It was actually dedicated to her friend and contemporary Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings. They knew each other. They visited with each other. And there's some really neat stories online talking about how they got around the racism of the time, because Zora, she was not allowed in some of the places that Marjorie went, which is ridiculous, but it was what it was. But she was brilliant, and she just, water off a duck's back, just kept going. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, journalist, she was known as the guardian of the Glades. She's the one who wrote Everglades River of Grass in 1947 and Alligator Crossing. And then another Marjorie Harris Carr, and her husband Archie Carr. Marjorie was a native of Boston, but she was raised in Southwest Florida. So as you heard earlier, she was an outspoken, dedicated, and insightful ecological scientist who understood natural systems and promoted that understanding among everyone else. I hadn't heard the story about her grabbing someone's tie, but from what I've read, I'm not surprised. And that couple actually lived in Micanopy. Archie Carr wrote A Naturalist in Florida in 1994. They lived up until now. So the contemporary perspective. So today, the contemporary perspective acknowledges both the role of humans as part of a system, participants in a habitat, whether we're in the city, the suburb, the woods, an office, school, whatever, and the unique qualities of humans, our population size and range, our acquisition of and dissemination of knowledge, and our impact on the land. Contemporary nature writing acknowledges that animals are capable of rich and full lives, interacting and communicating with other animals, much like humans communicate with each other and with other species in our lives, like our dogs and our cats. And I can't help whistling at birds. If you see me in the woods, I will be talking to the birds. So it is what it is. Anthropomorphism in contemporary writing takes into account animals' own personalities in conjunction with traits particular to the species. And anthropomorphism happens all the time. We yell at Siri. We argue with AI customer service bots. Our effectiveness is in how we use anthropomorphism in our writing. On the other hand, if somebody calls someone a mama bear, is that modern therianthropy? That'd be. Scientists and researchers know that animals are capable of many of the qualities we previously believed belonged only to our own species. So not a lot of people realize that not only fish, but insects take care of their young. They've actually found earwigs guard their young, which is, you would think it's a bug. It doesn't think, but they do. They certainly do. And we relate these findings to our readers. And actually, they just mapped the brain of a fruit fly. And the reason they did that is because, well, it's smaller than a human brain, clearly. But they're able to make parallels between how our brains operate and how fruit flies' brains operate. So they can take all of this mapping, and by looking at what it does and how it works, look at our brains and how they work. So yeah, we're a lot closer to our animal buddies than we want to acknowledge sometimes. Oh, other one. Hello. There it is. Okay, so contemporary writers, in effective communication, one of the best ways we can educate ourselves is by reading the writers who are making a difference. So this is only a very brief list of people currently engaged in nature or environmental writing, or writing that has an environmental element. If I've left off your favorite, I apologize. There's just so many great people. Cynthia Barnett, she's an environmental writer and journalist. Everything she writes is wonderful and very relatable. She is a College of Journalism and Communications environmental journalist in residence at UF. You can take her classes. Craig Pittman is also an environmental journalist and writer who is keeping those in positions of authority and power accountable. He's on the Florida Phoenix. That's an online newspaper. He's also on Facebook. Leslie Kent, I know, nobody uses Facebook, I know. Leslie Kent Poole is a fourth-generation Floridian and associate professor of environmental studies at Rollins in Winter Park. Susan Cerulean is a Tallahassee area naturalist and writer. Dr. Robert Knight established the Florida Springs Institute. He was here today. You got to listen to him. He's a really great guy. He's a really nice person to talk to, full of information. Amy Green is an author and environmental journalist for the Inside Climate News. She lives in the Orlando area. Jason Gully is a photojournalist and research geologist in Tampa. He is also a cave diver. He is an associate professor of geology at the University of South Florida. Jack E. Davis is a professor of environmental history here at UF. Jeff Vandermeer is a science fiction writer, bringing readers worldwide to an awareness of natural phenomena. He lives in Tallahassee, and he is really strange. I like him a lot. And then I just put the band J.J. Gray and Mofro on there. They're a band out of Jacksonville, Florida. And for me, their songs, Fireflies and Lockaloosa, have always like spoken of Florida. And actually, we were watching an old episode of House, and they played the song Lockaloosa. House was set in New Jersey. So that's how far-reaching some of our Florida stuff is. I mean, Mofro is actually a hairstyle between a mullet and an afro. So everybody's like, what is Mofro? I also wanted to mention Jeff Klinkenberg, Lars Anderson, Carl Hyacin, Ron Cooper, and Shayna Smith. She just wrote Islands of Cedars, which is an amazing, excellent book. All right, so this is you guys. What to write. So look at what is your purpose for writing. Are you trying to educate your readers? Are you enlightening them, informing them, or entertaining them? What approach or style are you most comfortable with reading? Would you write in the same style, or would you attempt to write outside of your comfort zone? For example, if you prefer to read memoir, but you need to write a news article for something you just discovered or learned, would you feel comfortable writing a news article? It's outside of what you're used to. What approach or style would reach the most readers? Academia and news have specific requirements. They need to be time-worthy. They need to have certain impact, certain human interest. Sometimes, though, you can write things for science journals, and it may not be as quick, but it gets it out there. People read it. Are you writing for a specific audience or for the general public? Do you write for an audience with a certain level of education or familiarity with the subject matter? Are you defining your acronyms? First, use always, please. Oh my gosh, so many people are not doing that. Terminology or jargon specific to your fields. You guys know what NSS-CDS is? National Speleological Society Cave Diving Section. Yeah, I use that all the time. BMAPs.
I know that.
Siphon. Catadromus. All right, go look those up. Do you, my mom, look it up. Do you feel that your writing provides enough information, or will readers be directed to further reading about your subject? Are you giving your readers a taste or the full meal? That's pretty much how I say that. Have you provided an explanation within your readers' abilities to comprehend the subject? Will the article or essay inspire people to consider or read more about the topic? Sometimes you just want to tell them what they need to know and that's it. Sometimes you want them to take action. You want them to get involved. You want them to respond. Stakeholders. Now, one of my other ladies is doing stakeholders, and specifically, newcomers with new eyes see only the beauty they encounter today. How do we explain that these features are not even what they were 10 years ago? You heard some of the panel people talking about that. 10 years ago, it was so much better. Sometimes the threat is unseen, but dangerous, like E. coli in swimming pools. They're swimming areas. That human behavior directly affects the health of the groundwater, the water we drink, swim in, water our plants and livestock with, the water that sustains this beautiful, sort of tropical, exotic, exuberant surface. While we may not be able to restore the springs to their original state, we know what we need to do to prevent them from getting worse. So there are things we can do to slow or prevent further degradation of our springs and our water supply. So I'm speaking of we both as a state and as individuals. And I'm also including new residents in this. There are many organizations springing up and vying for the attention of established and new stakeholders. And there are many state and federal agencies responsible for different aspects of land and groundwater protection. It's hard to straighten out who's doing what. That can be, there's the water management districts and the DEP and then federal, and each one of them has a different area that they watch over. And they overlap quite a bit, and it's never anybody's fault, it's always the other person's fault. To engage residents, visitors, and new neighbors, it's important to invite them to enjoy these features, our springs and rivers and forests, and encourage them to understand how these ecosystems work, what state agencies and organizations are doing, and what activities help or harm the groundwater. A positive message will go farther in encouraging people to learn how to protect their new home. It's up to the writers and artists, the communicators, to get the word to these newest residents. Your lawn doesn't have to be a lawn. It should probably be pretty, because people want pretty. Maybe chill on the aerial bug fogging, but especially near water. Our landscape is a sponge. Don't feed the wildlife. Don't pet the wildlife. I heard a story about some people on the Rainbow, and this woman's daughter went over to pet an otter and got bit. So I don't know what happened to her or the otter. Probably went their own ways. Do enjoy the beauty still before us. Do visit the parks. Camp, have picnics, go kayaking, walking, bicycling. Do hold your representatives accountable. This is your land. You guys, this is your parks. Even if you're not from here, these are, while you're here, this is yours. Enjoy it. We pay for this stuff. We should be taking care of it. That's how beautiful. I mean, they're beautiful. Yes, there's ticks and chiggers, but you know, gotta pay. So here are some methods of written communication. Oh, I lost my timer. Oh, there we go. Oh, I'm going way too slow. So how do we reach people? This applies to printed and online methods of communication. When we write, again, we have a reason for writing. So there are important factors to focus on, such as who is your audience? Are they a specific group or the general public? Can you make your writing personable and relatable to your readers? Again, what is your purpose? Is your writing to educate, to inform, a call to action? Your purpose will determine your method of communication. What do you need to convey? Is there a time element? Are there scientific details that need further explanation? Is this relating a personal experience? Are there particular people the writing is about or is trying to reach? Why should your audience care? This is the single most important thing. If the readers don't care, if they don't read your work or don't respond emotionally or intellectually to the writing, nothing will change. We can encourage readers to engage by avoiding doomsday saying, and approaching readers non-aggressively and non-dismissively without sensationalism and without being overtly sentimental. And although sensationalism sells, it is not respected as a rational approach. No, he might have a different. How do we, what's the difference between the New York Times and the National Enquirer? One is sensationalism and one is, how do we move readers from mere curiosity to actively changing their behavior or to generate cultural shifts or societal change? Regardless of your medium, regardless of the medium, obligations of civic engagement are nearly equal across the political spectrum. They actually studied this. They said it's slightly higher with Democrats, but pretty much it's equal. It doesn't matter if it's a Fox News listener or whatever, their engagement is still high. So how can we get people excited about science and the environment? So by using an interdisciplinary approach, providing ideas and steps people can take, give them hope. So scientific reports, this is the PhD level. Scientific reports, anybody can write one. It's peer reviewed. If you've got the knowledge, go for it. But typically it's at a PhD level. They're nonfiction. They adhere to a specific format. They are reports based on research on observed and measurable phenomena that can be verified by others. They are peer reviewed to maintain integrity, sensibility, and validity, which is accuracy. They are written for a specific audience, usually. Scientific reports acknowledge sources, providing documentation and references. They have graphs. They can also have illustrations, maps, photographs. So that's from Dr. Cannizzaro. And Sawicki, sorry, Dr. Sawicki. He is a cave diver and he is a microbiologist who has discovered so many creatures up in the north part of Florida, the little bitty guys that live in the caves, or cave monsters. I was going to bring in one, but I didn't bring one in. I have one in a little tube. People are fascinated by science. Evidence of their interest is in their engagement. People will ask all kinds of questions. They want our help in understanding these creatures, features, and systems. They want to know how they fit into all of this and how these things are affecting their families and their communities. As science communicators, our job is to translate the language of the academic from the ivory tower into something anyone can understand without being patronizing or condescending. It's easy to fall into that. Some fields seem to have a hidden code or a proprietary base of knowledge, and these are the situations that make the public distrust science and scientific engagement. Sometimes we're simply busy, and it never occurs to many active scientists and writers that the pestering is coming from someone who is open to learning and trying to engage. There shouldn't be a secret handshake. To be honest, most scientists and authors are very approachable and patient, and I can't thank these people enough for those qualities. I can walk up to Thomas and say, "What is this?" and hand him a vial with a creature in it. And he'll look at it and go, "Well, I don't really know, but I think it's blah, blah, blah." And I go, "Cool." Most of them are wonderful. Scientific news writing. So scientific news writing includes newspaper articles, agency or non-governmental organization bulletins, public service announcements, magazine and journal articles. They can be online or in print. We have the Florida Phoenix and the Marjorie, which are online. Tampa Bay Times is in print, but also available online. There can be trade journals versus magazines like Underwater Speleology, for those of us who are cave divers, NSS News for dry caver, people who cave in air-filled caves, and or the Discovery or Smithsonian Magazine, which my mother-in-law loves. These are also nonfiction. Truth in news reporting is paramount. These adhere to a specific publication format and criteria, and each organization has their own criteria. So when you want to submit something to anything, a literary journal, a scientific journal, read those criteria first. Otherwise, they'll just kick it right out. They won't even look at it. I took a grant writing course one time, and the woman who led the grant writing course said that if it wasn't in a sans serif font, she wouldn't even read it. It's that superficial. But not always. Sometimes it's very important. Limited space. In newspapers, when I studied media production, this was referred to, I think it is still referred to as the news hole. Okay? That emphasizes the importance of advertising revenue and short attention spans. They're written for a general audience. The old standard when I was at FSU, yes, I know, in the 80s was writing for an 8th grade reading level. And I think that's still the standard, although I read 6th grade recently. So has it dropped, or is it still, are any of you guys communications majors or journalism majors? It's technically sound information based on verifiable sources, often providing references directly through quotes or indirectly through links. So if you're reading and you see you can click on it and find the source material behind. Sometimes it's a dead link, drives me insane. News reports often have illustrations, photographs, and maps, because those visuals always help people to put themselves where they need to be. Then we come to nature or environmental writing. So this is a much broader, more creative field. This kind of writing, this encompasses articles, essays, memoirs, poetry, songwriting. There can be overlap with news writing. This kind of writing, though, can be fiction or nonfiction. These tend to be more philosophical and creative, often with a more casual and approachable style. They often use descriptive language, lots of adjectives, limpid pools of sapphire, shimmering, cerulean, translucent, but without being overly sensationalized. So these writings can be expressive. They can cover exciting or terrifying events. But when the subject is overly sensationalized, as a reader, I'm waiting to see what's being sold. I want to know what the subtext is. Reflections that are based on observed and experienced phenomena, they're evocative and emotive. They are written for a wide general audience. And this method of writing reveals interesting information through the writer's experiences and interpretation. It's not just the facts. It's what they felt, or what they tasted, or what they saw, or what they heard. Nature writing is often accompanied by illustrations, photographs, and maps. So my favorite analogy to writing about nature is that the writer is leading the reader as if by their hand through the experience. So you're letting them feel and sense and touch and taste and all of that good stuff. Yeah. And so the importance of wording. These are some of my favorites. That is not actually Randall Munroe. I thought it was, but it's not. So a funny way to explain the importance of using precise words and phrases and angles, and you get the idea. As authors, we endeavor to write ethereal prose that shifts perceptions, or poetry that arms the reader with new ideas, or articles that inspire and change humanity for the better. Sometimes we just want to share a funny story or a new discovery. That very human desire to connect with each other is what makes writing so gratifying. Seeing the number of writers and other creative people motivating others to embrace spring's protection, educating people, and arming them with the knowledge to understand and defend the natural spaces of our beautiful state. Y'all are the best. If this is what you guys are going to do, I'm so excited for you. In conclusion, briefly, to reach a wide audience, science communicators must be honest, relatable, open to other viewpoints, patient, kind, helpful, vivid. Encouraging a non-scientific general public to get interested and involved will help ensure the springs are protected and preserved for everyone today and for future generations. And I went half a minute over. Thank you. You guys can get in touch with me anytime. If you have questions, let me know. Ask questions? Are we done? Did anybody have any comments or questions or?
I think it's like important to not only like writing, but like when you're conveying your ideas or opinions, to like understand what motivates people as well. Because like you can say we have to, you know, be good to the environment, right? But people also have to be motivated, like sometimes by their own selfish like intentions.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yes. Yeah.
What do you think about the role of social media now in the kind of communication of scientific and environmental ideas? I feel that, especially for like younger people, like people in my generation, a lot of information, a lot of activism comes from social media.
Yeah.
So what do you think about like the role of it?
I think it's wonderful. If it can reach people, that's great. The problem is what format do you use? What platform? I mean, they're all over the place, you know, so you know, those of us who are, you know, older, I guess, are stuck with Facebook because that's what we started with. I know my nieces use Snapchat still. Insta is still big, but that's mostly just pictures and really fast. So like Twitter, Instagram, the ones that are just really fast, it's hard to get in depth. You can say, hey, the spring is dying, and then maybe they can click on and read something somewhere else just to get people's attention. So I guess it's the use, and I guess, you know, knowing your audience, knowing what people are reading, but I think it's great. The more you can get the word out, go for it, use it. Try not to pay. They don't want you to pay. Anybody else?
I just wanted to know how you got into cave diving. Like, how did you get into cave diving?
Oh, okay. Well, you express an interest. First, you go to one of the shops that teaches you to cave dive. That way you won't die. And you find an instructor that you have a good personality, a good rapport with. My husband got me into cave diving. I thought they were insane. I thought that was just, you know, no margin for error. What kind of idiots would go into an underwater cave? Oh my gosh. And then he showed me a cavern and I was hooked. I was done. I had never imagined such a glorious, amazing, beautiful, hidden world. I mean, it was amazing. So we went up to Peacock Springs and there was a lady sitting on a table smoking a cigarette. This was back in the 90s, early 90s, before y'all were born. And my husband goes up and goes, hey, Shelley, it's Shelley Orlowski. She's a famous cave diver. She's been in National Geographic things. And we start talking for a while and he's like, so are you up here teaching a class? And she goes, oh, my students, and throws a cigarette down and runs down to the water because that was their checkout dive. They were allowed to go down. And I was like, okay, if she can trust her students, then I want this woman to be my instructor. She trusted her students enough to go and do this. She also had the most perfect trim of any human being I've ever seen in the water. She could hover and nothing. She's just perfect in the water. Absolutely non-disturbed. It's challenging. You'll learn if you get into it. Cavern, cave. I think there's like intro to cave now, and then cave, and then I mean, there's several levels that you take. It's expensive to get into and maintain, but if you can do it, do it. It's amazing. So it's a whole other world. But if you don't get certified, you will die, and my friends or I will have to drag your bodies out, and I don't like that. I've been on recoveries. I don't like it. So please don't make me do that. Have we lost a girl? Well, I mean Agnes my friend down in Australia, but I don't know if we've lost anybody up here, have we? Girls. Most girls are a little bit more self-preservation. Then we call it testosterone poisoning. Like, oh, he died of testosterone poisoning. Any other questions? Yes.
I really enjoyed what you said.
Oh, thank you.
It was wonderful. I thought you brought up a good point about social media. It's interesting to think where writing sits in kind of the flow chart of changing attitudes or changing opinions. And I think probably it's more likely these days to start with social media, or more specifically, some kind of a visual, video, or preferably a site visit so people can see, like
Yeah.
Dr. Knoll was saying, once you're there, you'll understand.
Yeah.
And I think writing is more likely to come a little bit further on. So you've been interested, and your interest is up, and you're starting to form an opinion, and I think maybe that's where the writing comes in.
Yeah.
And say, okay, let me learn more about this.
What's going on here? Yeah.
So I wonder for the general writer, is maybe not so much of a burden to have that first step anymore. Maybe that first step is probably going to come someplace else.
Isn't that called the hook?
Right, so you
Yeah.
don't have to, now your obligations, and you use the word obligation, and I think that's a good word.
Yeah.
The writer, the editor does have obligations to the audience, and
Yeah.
they need to be taken seriously. But maybe we don't have that burden of bringing people in as much anymore, because there are so many other more common ways of doing it, and maybe better ways. Certainly being there in person is the best way.
Yeah.
Nobody would argue with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But a more practical, these days, a more practical hook is probably going to come from someplace else. That doesn't diminish writing. It just maybe changes the way you think about it.
Well, when you see any of the online media sources or newspapers, the first thing is usually a big picture. There's an
And
image of
these
some
days-
kind.
And these days, a video too.
Yeah.
A video.
Yeah. So, yeah, because we are visual, we're a visual species, so we're gonna go for that first. That's-
Right, and it's not just kids these days, I'm not
Yeah,
just
no,
being
no, it's-
old
oh, yeah,
guy.
no,
It's-
even-
it's-
yeah.
That's just, we've made that move. I mean, the
Well,
society has made
even,
that
I
move.
mean, I went to school in the 80s and MTV came out, and that was a huge thing. It was just visual, music with visuals, and I remember, before that, you had to stay up until midnight to watch music videos.
And everybody said, how is this going to change music?
And it really,
did.
well, for a little while it did,
Yeah.
but now it's kind of falling back into,
Right.
but it's harder to find new bands now. It is a lot harder to find good music. It's out there, it's everywhere, but it's just hard to find. But, so I think it's in the notes as well, my email and my website. The website is just general for Mudbug. That's just what my husband and I do, is the cave survey site has been there forever. But my email, if any of you have any kind of questions at all, please feel free to contact me. And that's the best way to contact me. I am hearing impaired, so if you call me, I may not hear the phone. So, but thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Thank
coming.
you.
I appreciate your attention.